You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 Goth Talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This episode, we are sitting down with Julian and Candace of Denver, Colorado. They are both promoters and Julian DJs as well. And we're going to be talking about a wide range of subjects. It's going to be one of those Goth Talk episodes. We're going to start off by talking about their primary events they run, the Gothic Takeover at Lakeside and the Arcane Vampire Ball. But we'll also be talking about things like the relevance of vampires to goth culture over the years, fashion and body shaming, and sharing tips on how to start your own events, as well as a lengthy rant about gatekeeping and Mallgoths towards the end of the conversation. And of course, other topics come up. We also have a fan-submitted essay on Mallgoths that I will be reading. We have Sinister Suggestions, where I will be sharing a whole slew of recent releases from lesser-known goth bands. And we have the wonderful Azzy returning with their segment, All Goth Considered. So you will definitely want to stick around for that. As always, I am Danny Ashes, and I'm here with my co-host, Trey. One of my favorite bits of the show is getting to listen to all of the origin stories when we have folks on and discover how diverse and similar our paths into goth are. So I would love to start there and ask you both that question. How did you get into goth? What was the journey into goth like for you?
Yeah, as a teenager, I was more into metalcore and post-hardcore and things like that. But a friend of mine in high school, Callum, got me into bands like Skltn Chr and Dawn of Ashes, as well as Velvet Acid Christ. And then when I met Julian, he got me into more bands such as Tragic Black and got me going out to events and
and
got more into goth from there.
And also, I introduced you to Pretentious Moi, and that was your favorite number.
I love Pretentious Moi.
My only story about Pretentious Moi is mispronouncing the name to DJ, who then laughed at me because I completely misunderstood how the name was pronounced, and that was like my funny, embarrassing story about that band.
No.
Anyway, what's been your journey into wanting to get involved with the scene? Like, where did you start with that?
Well, I really liked how after meeting a bunch of the people, everyone was very sweet and kind and welcoming. And I also very much enjoy the music and just being involved with people, like a very welcoming and open crowd.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. What about you, Julian? What's your backstory?
I think I got into goth maybe when I was about 14 years old. Actually, I remember one of the first times I ever saw what goth kind of looked like was when I was a kid. Once my parents took me down to a street mall called 16th Street Mall in Denver, and I actually saw a very gothy looking guy walking on the other side of the street that I thought looked really cool. And I saw a movie called Hangman's Curse.
Oh my God. Yeah, that was, I know exactly what you're talking about. There were goths in that movie.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm sure like, they were more like kind of baby badish, but either way, it was an exposure. And then, so about 14 years old, I met a kid who became one of my best friends, who introduced me to the concept of goth. He didn't know fully, about the culture. He just knew the style, and he showed me a book called Gothcraft by Raven Digitalis, and also there was a visual K band called Malice Miser, who He showed me too. And um, at that point, I just, I thought it was amazing. And then as I was getting more into it, eventually I joined Vampire Freaks and I discovered so much new music because of that site that just got me more and more drawn into the scene. And then this is going to be as a very cliche sounding, but when I turned 15, I went to Hot Topic and bought some new clothes. And
As you do.
yeah, I had my mom actually help me dye my hair black and do my makeup for the very first time. And when I looked at myself in the mirror after that, it's like I saw my entire future. I mean, here's the thing. I had gone through so many years just being so incredibly depressed and trying to find myself. And it was like that moment when I saw myself, that's who I felt like that was what I was meant to be. And I've been that way ever since. And I'm almost 30. And that was when I was right after I turned 15 years old and trying on the style essentially for the first time.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'm still reeling from the Hangman's Curse name drop because when I was younger, I didn't have much internet access or access to information about goths, especially because my family was so conservative. And when I had read the book, when I saw that movie when it came out, which I just looked up was 2003, that was one of those moments, like you said, a step in the path. I actually modeled my hair after the guy in that movie because I loved it so much. It's kind of those moments where like I'm trying to find out what goth is, and oh wow, I've found something new that feels right. I'm going to go for this. I've never heard anyone mention that movie before, so that was exciting.
I'm glad. That's awesome.
The topic I want to jump into first, you both run events, and so I want to explore both of those. I thought we could start with the Arcane Vampire Ball, which you founded, Julian. Can you, I guess, start by sharing how that came to be and what the purpose or ethos or impetus behind that event is?
Yeah, so I founded the event kind of with sort of a focus of sort of carrying the torch from previous events in the past, mainly because of the church nightclub here in Denver.
Oh, yeah.
And also because of the fact that vampire events, like, vampire masquerade type themes are so intriguing and interested in people. That's why I wanted to do it. And before that, I used to be the resident DJ for a now defunct event called the Denver Vampire Ball. Don't really want to get into why they dissolved because it's
yeah
kind of bad reasons. But yeah, I thought doing the Vampire Ball at the church needed somewhat of a fresh perspective. And for the fact that we had an incredibly successful first year, and now we're approaching our second year with our first theme, I'm very proud of it because that was actually my very first big production. It was the first time I've ever had a team of people managing certain aspects of the event and doing it in a large venue that can hold 1,200 people. So that to me was...
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was quite an amazing accomplishment for me.
I think for anyone, that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do want to talk about vampires a bit, but I actually, if I can go off script for a second, because I was thinking about this today.
Sure.
We were reading, Trey and I reviewed a book previously, and the setup for that book was to try and understand what goth music is. And the way they did that was by taking playlists from two events and saying, okay, this is what goth music is. And one of those events was a vampire ball. So I was thinking about, I was kind of thinking about a couple things. The first thing I was thinking about was what we discussed about the event is whether or not you would consider that a goth event, or is it like something broader? And then the other question related to that, which may be fun to ask, is just the way they defined goth music was by saying, well, it's whatever a goth DJ plays. Do you have thoughts about that, or do you have like a method by which to determine what goth music is?
I think goth music generally is kind of determined based on sort of the theory of both, the guitar and the bass sounds, and as well as certain synths that are used. Great examples, obviously, from when goth was in its infancy was Bauhaus and The Cure and Sisters of Mercy. Those three bands each have very different sounds within, the genre that they were doing. And now we have bands like Twin Tribes and She Passed Away. And essentially the style still carried on. And it's like there's the guitar tone, which is both distorted and also melodic, particularly with the Phrygian mode that kind of contributes to the haunting and dissonant sort of sound that it produces. And then there's synths that create soundscapes to help with the atmosphere. And also traditionally there's a very heavy bass sound that is very common with goth music. Of course, She Passed Away uses that bass sound, and Corpus Delicti is another great example of band that has the sort of bass sound that they use as well.
Candace, did you have any thoughts on that, or that idea that, if it's played at a goth club, it's a goth song?
I think it depends. Like, it's in the literal sense, yeah, there is the genre of goth rock, but
I mean, you're also hearing not just goth rock, death rock, and dark wave at clubs. You're also hearing industrial and maybe like minimal synth, like Boy Harsher as a good example. And also I'm seeing like EBM kind of not as popular as it was back in the day, but bands like Front 242, like, I love the old school industrial bands that kind of define the EBM sound, are still popular to this day. I mean, I even went to Front 242 late last year, and they had a sold out show. I was there. It was crazy.
Yeah, they played Cold Waves as well, and they had a great show.
By the way, if you hear a dog in the background, that's our dog Lestat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem. I've got two dogs downstairs that are barking every once in a while as well. So Lestat is a very good boy, girl.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Well, okay. So getting to vampires, or talking about sort of like, is it a goth event? Is it something broader? I wanted to ask about vampires because for me in the early 2000s, late 90s, when I was a baby bat, there was a greater crossover propinquity between goths and vampires. So I wanted to ask if we could chat about that a bit. Sort of, what is it about vampires that interests you? What do you think the connections and crossovers between goths and vampires are? That kind of thing.
Sure. I've always kind of seen goths or just like vampires as sort of a general interest in the goth scene since it began. I mean, for instance, Dave Vanian of The Damned dressed up like a vampire in the punk days of his band. And there's also people in our scene who love literature like Dracula and Interview with the Vampire. And also, movies are especially big role in our scene, like The Lost Boys, for example, which is one of Andy's favorite movies. So, to me, I think vampirism is just a very general interest in our scene. And the style of vampires, especially, is something that a lot of our scene incorporates, because there's a sort of a romantic sort of look to vampires, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you feel like vampires are more or less relevant now than they have been in the past, or maybe they're making a return?
I think they're kind of making a return. I feel like the fact that we have an upcoming movie being, Salem's Lot by Stephen King,
Oh,
that
yeah.
is adaptation that's about to drop, and a lot of people are showing interest about it. That does kind of tell me that vampires are, that's one particular aspect that tells me that vampires are still relevant, and also for the fact that there's all these vampire events in New Orleans, like Endless Night Vampire Ball or
Yeah.
Anne Rice Vampire Ball. It's, to me, I think vampires never really die. It's a very relevant and very alive sort of interest.
Yeah. Well, Candace, what about you? Or maybe if you want to talk about what vampires mean personally to you, or how they came into your life, I guess. It sounds like a proselytizing statement, but
I agree with Julian. I think they're very much still alive and there's still an interest. Oh goodness, how did I get into vampires?
I think it was because of me.
I was into vampires when I was a teenager.
I'm just okay. Okay, then I'm kidding.
Gosh, there was a book I read in, I want to say middle school, that really got me into vampires. I cannot remember.
There was like one I remember was some kind of circus something. I can't remember the name of it.
Cirque du Freak.
Yes, yeah, that one.
I did read that one at some point too, but I've always enjoyed the literature and movies, and I think they're a very interesting subject.
Mm-hmm.
Also, another thing just kind of came to mind. There's also a book called Lost Souls by Poppy Z.
Yeah.
And from what I've heard, Poppy herself was actually a part of the scene from back then. So yeah, the way that it's written and the characters that she has in that book, it's from the perspective of being in the scene, which is interesting. So that also kind of tells you another way that vampires are of our scene.
Yeah.
I guess one thing that I was, kind of curious about, it was both a thought and a curiosity. Mm-hmm. And it's in how the nature of the portrayals of vampires or the image of vampires have changed historically. Mm. Do you think that the goth subculture would have embraced or does embrace the entire history of vampires, or is it more a post-Stokerian vampire where it became more humanized, had more that sort of seductive quality, especially as, Bela Lugosi portrayed Dracula versus, say Murnau and Nosferatu.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really great thought right there. From what it looks like is the goth scene kind of embraces a particular look, and mostly inspired by, the Interview with the Vampire and Dracula, like I said. Nosferatu, his image is actually described as very rat-like. So he has long teeth and those elongated ears. So sort of what you would call like a monster type look, whereas the image of Dracula and also Louis and Lestat from Interview with the Vampire, they're very refined and they have a certain romantic image to them. And I think that's probably the image that a lot of the scene really embraces. Mm-hmm. And I can't really think any further than that, but I hope that answers your question.
It does a little bit. And it's also interesting how, in some mythoses, you've even included things like the Lost Boys, but things like Lost Boys, or what was the Quentin Tarantino one?
Dusk Till Dawn.
Dusk Till Dawn. How they have sort of both images in them, where vampires can look elegant and normal and human and seductive, but then when they go full on vampire, they usually transform into a much more Nosferatu-esque sort of demonic bestial appearance. And I think that's an interesting thing that you don't get from your Anne Rice style or even, your Bela Lugosi, where all they do to change is they grow some fangs. Yeah, but they keep that elegance. They keep the sort of seductive fantasy aspect of it.
Yeah, and thing about Lost Boys is From my understanding, it is a movie that really helped bring back the interest of vampires at the time, because it was a movie that sort of modernized them. And the characters, of course, they met the look of, certain people from back then. So
Right.
that's one of the most interesting things about that movie, is that from an influential perspective from back then, not only did it bring back so much interest in vampires, but it just completely put a whole new perspective on the look of image by portraying them as modern young kids, from that time.
Yeah, rather than the traditional Victorian or Edwardian, noble style that you get from the classic vampires.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I guess from my perspective, yeah, most of the styles of Goths, who portray a vampire image these days are still, at least, mostly going for the elegant look. At least that's my experience. But I've also seen, some people do cool photo shoots that are like Lost Boys inspired. So it does kind of branch out a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to share also that vampires were always an important part of my sort of goth identity or experience, especially when I was younger. I know whenever I'd interact with goths in places, there was always a heavy influence from specifically like Anne Rice, like we said, and Victorian clothing. And there was a lot of conversation around Gothic novels and vampires, Poppy Z. Bright, like you mentioned. I even heard a joke several times about Vampire the Masquerade being bridge for goths. And also for me, there were a lot of documentaries coming out around that time about like energy vampires, and there seemed to be a lot of crossover with the goth scene there, at least aesthetically, with people like Don Henry and what was her name? Michelle Belanger. And because I think a lot of them considered themselves goths, and that's like a whole other like drama thing to get into. But there was always that association, and it seemed like the influence or closeness of vampires with goths has lessened over time. I think maybe that was because at the time, and this is just my theory, but there were fewer goth bands. There were goth bands, but there weren't that many. And now there's such a diversity of music that we don't need to, like, if you went to a goth club, it would be all synth pop, future pop, industrial. And so when I had conversations with goths, we were talking about literature and gothic novels and popular media or vampire movies. And you could get a lot of respect by having a lot of knowledge of gothic literature. And I think that may have been because there was less of an emphasis on music at the time. And you had, like, speaking of movies, we mentioned a few of them, obviously Interview with the Vampire, Queen of the Damned, Underworld, and Blade, like these big blockbusters. But I was watching like TV dramas like Blood Ties, and which also had goths in a couple episodes, Moonlight, and like all these indie movies like Subspecies, and Perfect Creature was one I really liked. It was like this steampunk vampire movie that kind of explored religion. And I had like dozens and dozens of those kinds of movies. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that seemed like it was such a strong related part of the goth scene that doesn't seem to be there now, although it did cause me some problems. I remember having an ongoing argument with my mom where she would be like, why are you trying to dress like a vampire? Because for her, this was like this demonic obsession thing. And then I'd have to explain, I'm not trying to dress like a vampire. I'm dressing like a goth. We just happen to look like vampires. But you have all the ingredients for the goth lifestyle there, right? The staying out late at night, this sort of otherworldly, decadent, uncanny aesthetic or way of being that sort of queers social conventions, which I think is one of the ways that goths like to get some agency, agency of being in the world. You've got the ephemera, like, or the symbolism, like coffins and bats and castles and full moons. And you mentioned, Julian, that the music obviously took inspiration from vampires from the 80s and on. And so I guess for me, it's kind of sad that vampires aren't as prevalent anymore, but I agree with you. I do think they're making more of a comeback, and I am excited to see that, because for me, that's always been a part of what I associate with goth.
Yeah, absolutely. And oh, my God, I couldn't have said it better than you, Danny. You really make a valid point there.
I'm sure you could, but we'll move on. Well, so before we talk about the Gothic takeover, I did want to ask, because Julian, I know you've done a couple videos at least that I've seen, or TikToks and YouTube videos, about the various things that goths can do in the area. And I like to get that kind of flavor for people that aren't there. Like, what are the options? What is the scene like? What's, cemeteries, shops, that kind of thing. What's going on around that area?
Yeah, well, right now, as it is, a lot of our shows that happen in Denver, particularly since that's where we're from, are at a venue called HQ on Broadway. So we got a lot of really great concerts that happen there. And also we do have goth nights and events. We used to do a lot of things at a place called Milk Bar, but they've kind of drifted away from supporting our scene.
They're still doing Repent, though.
Yeah, actually, I mean,
which is happening this Friday.
That's right. Yeah. So, but what I'm trying to get at here is it used to be where events were so frequent at Milk Bar, but like now they only really happen occasionally. Like Repent, for instance, happens every last Friday of the month at Milk. At Milk still there's Goth Night every Wednesday and Saturday, and then there's also Goth Night every Sunday at Bar Standard. Another thing is I'm a resident DJ for every second Friday of the month at Trax Nightclub, and we do very gothy events there. Both kind of goth and industrial, actually. It really just depends on, the ideas that my mentor AJ comes up with, because it's his event. And as far as shops and sites go, currently here in Denver, one of the biggest stores we have is called Fashionation. Yeah, and they have a huge TikTok following. So almost everybody who visits goes there, and a lot of people who live here, shop there when they need particular items and clothing. And
oh yes, I have. I just looked it up. I have seen this shop before. Yeah, very cool.
Started getting a good following on TikTok and things like that.
Fascination blew up on TikTok during the pandemic. I think they were struggling as a business at the time because of all the shutdowns, but TikTok, to their amazement, kept them active and gave them a lot of support, which I thought was amazing. Aside from Fascination, there's also a store a couple blocks up from it called Crimson Rose Masquerade, which is it's like a masquerade store, basically. They have beautiful clothing that's both for women and men if you want to get something formal. Like, for instance, they sell shrine clothing.
Oh, yeah.
There's a person named Tiffany Smith who makes these leather masquerade masks that are amazing.
Ooh.
And also another big one is a store called Disguises, which is like a costume store, but they also have a lot of amazing goth stuff. And also, like, the biggest apothecary for our scene is called Ritual Craft. And it's a very beautiful store that has both a sort of gothy and earthy sort of vibe when you go in. So kind of witchy in a sense. Babe, do you have any great recommendations.
And if you want to go outside of Denver to Colorado Springs, there's the Arbitrarium.
Yeah, Ryan from Witch Hands.
Yikes.
That's right. Yeah, that's his store.
Yeah.
They're amazing and they have some great things. As far as cemeteries and things like that go, that was my favorite thing to do when I was younger because I couldn't go to events.
Yeah.
There's a lot in Denver. There's Fairmount Cemetery. What is the one I used to live by, Julian?
I think it was called Mount Oliver.
Mount Olivet. There's Mount Olivet Cemetery in Golden. And if you're willing to drive outside of the city to the mountains a little bit, there's some really neat older cemeteries called Knights of Pythias or Pythias. I've heard it pronounced multiple ways. And the Central City cemeteries are amazing and beautiful and old, if that's your cup of tea.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's in the name of the show. That is a veritable smorgasbord. I don't never know how to say that word. That's fantastic.
Pretty much said it right.
Yeah.
Speaking of Fairmount Cemetery, I don't know if you guys like Seraphim Shock, but they actually made a song when they were first starting off called "Farewell to Fairmount," which is about Fairmount Cemetery.
I'm gonna look that up right now. That's awesome. That's a really fun piece of trivia.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, part of that local flavor to transition is, of course, the event that you developed, Candace, which is the Gothic Takeover at Lakeside. So, same sort of question. Can you talk about when you started that, why you started it, how that came about?
Goodness. So I had the idea in my head when I was 16 or 17, but I didn't have the network to really start it at that point. So I didn't do anything about it. And then when I was 19, I was 19 when we started talking about it, right?
I think you were, yeah.
So when I was 19, Julian and I were dating and I had brought it up to him and we decided to make a post on Facebook and a couple of our friends said they were interested and we thought it'd be a good idea, like to give people the chance to meet up and make some friends and get to know each other. We made a Facebook page and we thought maybe a couple people would come from our scene and it just kept getting shared over and over again. And before we knew it, we had hundreds of people responding as going. So it became this big thing and we decided it had to happen every year.
That's really impressive how quickly that whole event grew. Because I was looking at some pictures on it. It was just after a few years, you were having massive crowds in the group shots.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think the nice thing about it is it's all ages. If
that helps.
you're young to go to events, it's something fun to go to. If you're someone with kids and you just can't find the time to go out, it's an opportunity for you to get out and be with people. And it's just a really fun event and it supports a very small local amusement park.
Yeah, I do see all the time, thinking about how you started that, where you had this idea at a young age and then eventually were able to develop and create that. I see online every once in a while Goths, especially in more rural areas, bemoaning the lack of a scene. And so I thought that was something I could ask, since you both run events, sort of, or what advice would you give to people who want to start an event? Where should they start? What should they expect versus various types of events, that kind of thing?
My advice, if you were living in an area where there seems to be an active scene, I'll get to the, if it was a, rural area, if you were in an active scene, obviously the big thing would be to sort of go out and support all the current events that were going on, to just sort of show that you want to be in the scene and just try to be mentored by these people. On the other hand, if it's a rural area, I think one of the major things that I found when I was younger, when I first started using the internet, was that, using forums and social media was a great tool to try to discover new people. When Vampire Freaks was around, there was a cult, as it was called, created that was called Colorado Goths, and that kind of helped us discover more people that were around in certain small towns, and we were able to get together. So I think one of the big things to sort of start doing events is kind of networking and getting to meet people is one of the key things, and showing that you really want to support and bring stuff to people. So internet is, maybe the internet is obviously not perfect, but it does really help in bringing people together.
Just so this is kind of related. I did see one fun idea. If you're having a house party, for example, which that's like a whole other thing. If you're thinking about, who is it 21 and up? Who's going to be drinking? Are your neighbors going to call the cops? That kind of thing. But I saw this suggestion on TikTok for house parties where you have a designated puzzle corner. So you have like a table in a corner with a jigsaw puzzle or something similar to that. And then when you run into an awkward situation and you don't know how to leave a conversation, you can just say, I'm going to go work on the puzzle now. And it's also, I thought it was a fun idea for people with anxiety, because then you have an object of focus that you can do and also have conversations instead of just, naked conversation or dancing or that kind of thing.
Right.
I kind of want to steal that idea. That's interesting.
Yeah, house parties are so much funner too, because back then, all we were really doing was just like meetups in like public places.
Yeah,
that's a great thing to use to connect with people too. If you're in a smaller, more rural area where you don't have a ton of events, is house parties. So you can have the chance to, if you trust the people and are comfortable having them in your space.
Yeah. Well, so I guess returning to the Gothic takeover at Lakeside for a moment, I did, in prep for this episode, I went through and watched all of the YouTube videos that you posted, which were wonderful. And one of the things that stood out to me was the diversity of style in the people that showed up. It really kind of reflected my experience in the goth scene more than what I see in a lot of other video content from goths online, where everyone involved is wearing flawless, exquisite goth fashion, and they all look like Instagram models. And so I wondered if you could speak to that a bit, because in some circles online, it seems like there's this expectation or pressure for a certain aesthetic that's like perfectly done, and that doesn't really fit with my lived experience in a local scene.
Yeah, I think it's important to have the diversity. Like, not everyone can afford to be Instagram model ready all the time. And there's so many different styles and ways you can go about things. I majored in fashion design, so I really like the whole DIY thing and thrifting things and just reusing. But I think it's important having that diversity, so people getting into the scene can see, like, you don't have to look exactly this way to be part of this community.
Yeah, and I'm the one who does the videos by shooting them and editing them. And my approach is, I want to make sure that everybody feels included, that, they're not excluded. Of course, it's hard because of the fact that there's so many people to capture everyone. So I do the best I can, but I just want, everybody to know that this is an event that is not for specific looking people. This is for everybody. And that's the goal, is to make sure that they feel very welcome and accepted, especially if maybe they're traveling from afar to be there.
I think there's also a factor with the choice of venue and the choice of the style of event that leads to that sort of inclusiveness because of the sheer, I guess, accessibility of it. I mean, when you look at the events that I think Danny was referencing regarding, everyone looking like an Instagram model, those are usually those big events that are, people are traveling from around the world at decent expense to go to an event that has a pretty high expense to get in and to participate in. So they have all these little bars that basically sort of weed out the people who can't afford that, who also consequently can't afford the, elegant clothing or the hours and hours it takes to put those outfits together, because they've got families and jobs and other things to do. Whereas when it's in more of a public venue, catering, primarily to a local crowd, but also, it's open to other people outside of the local scene who are willing to travel. But it's also a public space. So it's not, there's no sense of a velvet rope or any sort of idea behind culling who can and cannot attend. So anybody can feel comfortable going in whatever they're comfortable with. And I think that really helps make those events a lot more comfortable for people who can't, won't, don't want to put all that time, effort, and expense into a look or an aspect of their lifestyle.
Definitely. And one of the reasons that I did choose Lakeside is it's not terribly expensive to get in. It's $3 for entry, and if you want to ride rides, it's a little bit more. So it's more accessible to people no matter what your situation looks like.
Yeah, I really love that. And I also love what you said, Julian, about making sure everyone feels included, because I don't see it as much as I do online, but in person I have met people who are sort of the kind of look down on you if you aren't dressed to the nines and they don't think you're goth enough. And I like to think that I'm always happy to sit down and talk with anyone, regardless of any kind of criteria, gother than thou criteria or whatever. But yeah, I wanted to bring it up because I see a lot online. Well, not a lot, but I'm seeing more often online this sort of idealization of trad goth aesthetic and certain types of more, uber goth music. And, for me, when I was a baby bat in the early 2000s, the big fashion was the romantic goth look, right? The crushed velvet and lace ruffle collars and 10 layers of really expensive clothing and beautiful makeup, like stuff I would see at Wave Gothic Treffen when I looked at pictures of that. And for a while when I was younger, I put this pressure on myself to live up to what I saw online. Otherwise, I felt like I wasn't goth enough. And my experience, though, was that the majority of goths don't look like, I don't know, Killstar models or whatever. And that was always kind of a harmful way to view myself. And I always worry that other goths are going to put that same pressure on themselves now. And I think eventually what I learned was that I cared more about things that gave me actual fulfillment, like community and the quality of the friends that I kept, not whether or not I could take a photo that would get a bunch of likes on MySpace or Vampire Freaks or whatever. Yeah, it's like I do think the clothing is important and fun, but when we start to use it as a form of othering, and this sort of hierarchical or meritocracy way of thinking, that's when we need to examine our motives and our relationships with maybe the systems that we're raised in. I guess I don't know if I want to get this personal. I'll decide if I want to leave this in or not. As an example, sort of talking to the pressure I felt when I was younger, there was this, I'm mostly Sicilian, so I tan very easily if I'm outside. And when I was getting into goth, I fell into this idea that I think it was more common a couple decades ago, but this idealization of the Eurocentric vampire aesthetic, which is associated with whiteness. So I had this internalized racism to the point that I hated my skin tone or even my body shape if I wasn't thin enough. And if I ever started to tan, I associated that with being less goth. And so for me, recognizing where that came from and making like decolonization an important part of my life, that became really important to me, to remove that pressure, to understand where that came from. And so, yeah, I guess I just wanted to make that point for anyone who feels similarly, because I know there are people that do.
I remember when Julian and I first started dating, he was very much the same way. I'm very active in like being outside, and I'm Irish and German heritage, so I don't tan at all.
Mhm. You turn red.
I'm same. I'm same as you, Candy. I'm Irish, Norwegian, German. So I burn, don't tan.
Yeah, when I was young, I did kind of have sort of this expectation for myself to really try to live up to all the cliches in the aesthetic, like pale skin and having perfect makeup and stuff. But, you know, when I was young and in my infancy of goth, you don't really know what you're doing. You're still trying to figure out, you know, your style when you're getting in. And what I found was, you know, the older I got, the more I started, you know, not to care. And thing is, you know, I am of partially Romanian descent, so it does. My skin tone does tan way too easily. And I remember feeling so offended when my mom and dad would be like, "Oh my God, you're getting a good tan." I'm like, no, but I I don't care anymore. You know, the way I look at it is like skin tone does not play an important factor in the scene. Because like, what about black goths? You know, are they supposed to be pale? Anybody should be a part of the scene, no matter how dark or light their skin is. And I decided a long time ago that I just wouldn't care. And if I had olive skin tone as a result of exposure to the sun, then that's just how it's going to be. And, you know, of course, I didn't believe in cliches like smoking clove cigarettes either. So.
Well, now that is a disqualifier.
Yeah. So, yeah. It seems like when you are younger, there are certain things that you get confused about and feel like you're pressured to live up to. But, you know, as you get older, you start to feel like you can be more of yourself and you don't have to have this expectation to really sort of try to live up to how everybody thinks what goths should be. It's just not being afraid to actually express yourself and just feel comfortable, but just being the way that you are while, you know, donning the style in your own unique way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, I was going to save this question for later, but it seems appropriate here, about what your opinion on body positivity is in the scene, or body shaming, if that goes on, if there's still, you know, harmful expectations around that or not.
I think it's such a thing that's so ingrained in our society. I think it's bound to happen. I haven't seen a whole lot of it happening, but I don't want to invalidate other people's experiences, and I'm sure it's there. I think I hate that there is like people who act negatively towards different body types, and I think everyone should be loved and respected no matter how they look.
Yeah.
Can I tell them about the experience we had, babe?
Yeah, you can tell them about mine.
Okay, well, yeah, so just like Candy, I haven't luckily experienced direct body shaming myself, but there was one really horrible experience where someone looked at Candace and asked if she was pregnant. And when she said no, he decided to try to insist that she was.
Oh, God.
Wow.
Yeah. What he was trying to make it be like he spiritually could tell that she was pregnant, but one thing he failed to realize was that I had a vasectomy. So I don't know what what the problem with him was. There was something messed up about him. On a positive note, though, I have seen some people online and in other communities try to embrace many different body types. Like I've actually seen, I think it may have been Killstar who had plus size models, and when I saw that, I just thought that is fantastic. How are people who have maybe larger body types supposed to get inspiration when buying clothes? So having plus size models really helps in that. And embracing many different body types would be such a pivotal part of our scene to really show that it doesn't matter, that all body types should be welcome.
I was just going to say, I felt like I had, I guess, a very fortuitous first experience with goth subculture, in that the first scene I was a part of was very diverse along multiple different spectrums. I mean, we had some very prominent members of our subculture who were Black, who were Asian, and the majority was still white. It was still Central, Midwestern America, but we had Hispanics and Blacks and Asian as well as white, and no one really differentiated between the groups as far as one being more goth than the others. We also had people who were fairly large or fairly skinny, tall and short. We had a few members who were regular attendees who were in wheelchairs. It would be, out on the floor dancing with everybody else, just in their wheelchair. And we had, when we had venues that weren't wheelchair friendly, we had plenty of people who were willing to help carry the chair and the person who occupied the chair up those stairs so they could go to the events. So it was really, really my first experience, my baseline understanding of what goth was this giant, diverse group of people who didn't seem to really pay that much attention to physical, psychological, sexual, gender differences as heavily as society that I grew up in seemed to. And I felt that was a welcome release, because I never really felt like I was, meeting the standards of male beauty growing up. I was always sort of the weird skinny nerdy kid. So having this community that I could go to that didn't seem to care about those superficial trappings was even more of an escape for me. And so that was my baseline of goth. And I will say that even going outside of that community, yes, I've seen more of the problems. I've seen more of the body shaming side of things. I've seen more of the racist side of things. I've seen more of those things in other scenes, but it still feels like it's always been at least better than the baseline of society, which is something that I've always just loved about the community, and why whenever I do see it become a problem, I like to speak out about it and like to, make sure that part that I've always loved about our community isn't lost.
It definitely is a lot better than the baseline. I agree with that.
That actually kind of reminds me, before I tried on the style for the first time, as I explained earlier, I never, ever looked at myself and thought I was beautiful. And when I tried on makeup and had my look for the very first time, that was the first time I ever had this, saw myself as beautiful and confident in myself. So I think now more than ever, I've been a little bit more comfortable without makeup, luckily. But it's just interesting to me how the scene can actually boost confidence when you find out that it's this was the style and the music that you were meant to listen to and enjoy and be and dressing up in.
I will say it seems to me like Gen Z are doing a lot of normalizing of not being in full makeup and dress and their social media and that kind of thing and talking about that. Whereas the people I grew up with were more prone to the you have to be on all the time sort of mentality, which again, I think can lead to unrealistic expectations. And it's been really nice to see the new people coming in normalizing and being comfortable with being goth and not being covered in, makeup and whatever all the time. And it doesn't matter as much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing how like there was such a different perspective back then as there is now. And I love the fact that we're heading in such a more positive direction these days.
Well, speaking of younger goths, I have seen, especially on TikTok, which is, its own algorithm and closed circle because I bubble. There we go. I've seen a lot of newer people getting into goth seemingly. So I thought it would be good to ask what advice you would give younger people trying to move as they get older into going to local events and that kind of thing. Maybe if they have some anxiety about that, or what they should look for, who they should try and hook up with, like in a mentorship kind of way, not the other kind of way.
I was waiting for you to caveat that one.
Babe, did you want to answer first?
Oh, goodness. I don't know. You've had more experiences in like a mentor kind of way and like who to avoid. So maybe you should start.
My advice for anybody getting into the scene is don't befriend anybody who is elitist or gatekeeping to the extreme. Biggest mistake I felt that I ever made when getting into the scene was befriending someone who was actually much older than I was, who was exactly like that. Unfortunately, back then, the scene I grew up in, and me and other friends, as well, there were some people who were very unfavorable in surrounding themselves with younger kids. And that was probably the biggest mistake I ever made, was surrounding myself with older people who had this expectation of what goths should be. And it's not worth it. You got to realize that the scene evolves, and these people are just going to really hold you back. And especially the one person who I was friends with for quite a few years, he did, take away quite a few years, that I could have spent really trying to be responsible. So the only advice really I have is, don't befriend elitists. Do not, become gatekeepers to the extreme, and try to be, very open about not just goth music, but other music that goths could be listening to.
Then I would say, make sure you feel comfortable around the people you're becoming friends with or looking to for guidance. Like if any of them make you feel uncomfortable or not welcome, just avoid that. Sure.
Yeah, don't listen to any naysayers.
Yeah, as far as advice, I might say like, don't expect the club experience to be like the online experience.
Yeah.
That's not to say you won't run into assholes or anything like that, but the online scene is much broader and more disparate than a local scene. Actually, Angela Benedict made a great point in one of her videos saying that you can kind of develop some anxiety about going to a goth event, building it up in your head for so many years before you turn 18 or 21. And so I would say, again, like take the online scene with a grain of salt. It can be helpful. I hope this podcast is helpful, for example. But what really matters is, for most people, is making friends and building a local community. I did want to, if you'll indulge me for a second, because I really like that point Angela Benedict made, and I've connected it to some social theory as far as the way that I think this anxiety forms and where that comes from. And I'll try and condense it for the sake of everyone listening, but I will. There's an interesting video about this I'll put in the show notes if anyone wants to look it up. But there's this theory of modern media from a guy named Walter Benjamin. And it's this idea that modern media is full of commodification and self-commodification. So you see actors becoming brands and selling themselves to an audience, and influencers kind of doing the same thing. And modern media, or modern film, and I guess media more broadly, is not just about the story and experience. You have these massive marketing machines that create this cult of personality, similar to like how the makeup marketing shames women into hating their bodies in order to get them to buy products, right? So media helps create this commodification, which the actors take part in. And thinking about ourselves, we can also kind of think of our identities as a brand to be sold to others. Like, how do we market ourselves, especially online? And I think that can create a lot of anxiety of not succeeding or not fitting in because you can't sell yourself well enough. And I think that's rooted in capitalism, and also this way that it creates an audience of critics, because the media that we consume builds this expectation of, what would the word be? I can't think of it, but where like the camera is mediating the audience experience, as opposed to that experience being interacting with a performer, like at Rocky Horror Picture Show, for example. And so we get conditioned through this reproduction of art to become a customer who wants to be entertained, and also a critic. And then I think the argument is that translates into online presentations where, like with social media, we become the audience seeing each other through the phone instead of interacting with others. So that critic mindset is reinforced through like likes and hearts and comments, as to how well you sell yourself to your peers. I think that just can be incredibly damaging and can lead to a lot of anxiety and depression, because you feel like, again, you have to sell yourself well enough in order to be accepted. And I don't get that in in-person communities. I don't see that judgment or scorn as much, nearly as much, when you're involved in a physical community. So I think that can be healing from that anxiety. So sorry for that, going off on that, but thought it was interesting.
Oh, you're good. Actually, I enjoyed listening to you talk about that.
I think being in a physical community is a lot better. I get anxious about being in a community in person or posting online. So it's one of those things that I work on, but it does seem like online and having that pressure to have a certain amount of likes or comments on your pictures can cause conflict or problems in some people's self-image. And
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot harder to take that sort of environment into the real world, because a lot of us are used to seeing it. I mean, we've normalized this idea of social judgment and social comparisons within just our general culture, with the rise of things like reality TV and stuff, where it was no longer dedicated to judging famous people. It was, taking ostensibly normal people and putting them into scenarios where they would then get judged, whether it's talent shows or reality shows. And then that evolved into online presences where we were cultivating personal pages. We were creating these personas with our MySpace pages or our Facebook pages or our Instagram feeds or our TikToks that are designed to display us to our peers for judgment because of the likes and favorites and all that stuff that has been built around that is what the companies use to, push engagement, which is of course how they make their money. So they're pushing you into that idea, but it's been normalized. But all of that's very anonymized. The people who are doing the judging, I mean, obviously the people who are being judged, they know who they are and they know that they're being judged. But the people who are doing the judging, they're hiding behind thumbs up signs and emojis and sort of arbitrary numbers and stats, so they can feel like they can be free to judge without getting necessarily that judgment in return. Whereas in public, when you're judging somebody face to face, it's harder to push yourself to do that, because you then have the obvious repercussion of, if I judge someone, I'm being judged at the same time. I can't do this in a one-way manner.
Right.
So it's harder to overcome that, just that general sort of social pressure to be a nicer person when you're in person. It's harder to overcome that desire to be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not only that, but it's like people will use this as a facade, to what's actually going behind the scenes. And also, it's hard to try to tell people, like, your amount of following or likes on social media, it's not a relevant symbol of status. People just really take it too seriously, and it's sad. It really is.
Yeah, it's really hard to avoid doing that, because it is such an easily quantifiable number. And it's hard to quantify your social status if you don't have something that's easily measurable. It takes a lot more work to figure it out through social cues and through interactions than it is, here's my like to dislike ratio.
Yeah.
So, okay, moving on from that, I wanted to ask, I guess, considering your experience with running events, what you think the responsibilities of an event promoter are when it comes to providing a safe space, and how you go about that.
I think, first of all, when you're throwing an event, you should always deliver on promise. So if your audience is expecting certain music that you're talking about, you need to make sure that you have that. You also, need to make sure that if you're going to run an event, that you do have adequate security, so that way situations where people don't feel comfortable with the conduct of others are taken care of very swiftly.
Like with the Vampire Ball, we make sure we have security on all the floors, and we have our own personal staff members. So we have our VIP hosts who, if anyone is making an attendee feel uncomfortable, they can go to security or any of the people working the event for help.
Yeah, and also one of the things about the Arcane Vampire Ball is it's actually one of the only dress code enforced events here in Denver. Of course, we don't enforce a strict dress code. People can come as casual as they want, like in a cocktail dress or suit and tie if they wanted to, or they can dress elaborately. The only thing with that event is we're trying to make sure that we maintain a positive atmosphere for how the Vampire Ball is, essentially, and to also make sure that we keep out unwanted guests, because I've seen so many situations where people just walk into a goth club and they'll start harassing goths, or even worse, try to pick up on, the goth girls, and it's sickening. So it makes me kind of proud that we're one of the few dress code enforced events to do this.
One thing that I'm curious about, again, about the safe space thing, have you ever experienced a tension between, as a promoter, wanting to create a safe space, but having the venue wanting to create a space that's open to as many people who are going to buy their product or pay the cover price? Mostly because as the promoter, you aren't necessarily also owning the venue. The venue has its own ownership and its own motives as far as why it wants attendees to show up?
Absolutely. I can't help that, obviously. So my approach when doing events where there's no dress code enforced is just make sure that I'm constantly walking around and making sure that guests are comfortable. And that's what I love to do with smaller events that are not as big as, say, the Arcane Vampire Ball. And I always encourage people who do not feel comfortable with certain people that they're encountering to always talk to me. And my job is just to make sure that we're keeping a safe space as present as possible. There's always the risk of somebody doing something wrong when an event is active. So my role, I feel, in being a promoter is to make sure that there is as much safety as there is a fun event for everyone.
It does seem like a lot of the venues do side with you on keeping it safe, and
it's because I'm so blessed to get to work with amazing people to produce these events with. They're willing to really know my sort of outlook, I guess.
What your values are as far as, when you're curating a subculture or you're curating a community, what values you want to instill in that community.
There, exactly. Just perfect way to explain it. Yeah, they are able to understand my values and what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and one thing I thought was really interesting, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding that, but you mentioned the VIP hosts as an adjunct to official security. Am I correct in assuming that those VIP hosts are basically members of the community rather than people from the venue themselves?
They are,
yes, that is correct.
And is that something you came up with as a way to, I guess, mitigate the potential conflict of interest between you as a promoter who's trying to instill a sense of community and a venue which is trying to instill a consumer base?
I would say it's kind of like guest relations in a sense.
Okay.
I think it's more of an extra layer of safety just to make sure a venue can only have so much security and an extra set of eyes to just make sure everyone's doing okay and everyone's safe and everyone's comfortable. It makes the event run more smoothly.
Yeah. And of course, these are people who are kind of part of our culture. So, they have a perspective that maybe not all, general security staff may have.
Right. And I think that's important because I think that's usually one of the things is just a misunderstanding that a general security might have because they have their norms from, being security in the venue on all of the nights, not just for a themed night, a goth night, or a subcultural night, which may have and often does have different norms from other nights that they secure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
No, that's really good. I really appreciate that. I think especially because a lot of goths are queer. That's really important. Like there was that, I don't know if you saw that cute interaction between Trixie and Katya where Katya they were joking about how many goths are gay, and then Katya was confused about that and was essentially like, if that's the case, why don't I ever see them at gay bars? And Trixie was like, well, that's because they go to goth clubs. And
in my experience, most goth clubs are at gay bars, or at least a lot of them are.
Yeah.
Our Second Fridays is not a gay bar.
Yeah.
The one in Colorado Springs I used to go to way back in 2009 or so was a gay bar. I don't think that venue exists anymore, though, unfortunately.
I know Shimmer's been at gay bars. I think it was Shimmer I'm thinking of. But yeah, I just, like, for me, I know I get nervous about, and I know there's a lot of goths of color that have been talking about sometimes not feeling welcome in certain spaces. I know I get nervous about hate crimes and mass shootings and shit like that, especially when it's all over the news and everything. So any sort of stated, and I think there's a thing you have on the website as well about safety being important. That stuff all makes me feel more comfortable and willing to go to an event. So
Yeah, I think having a general code of conduct is another good responsibility to have as an event promoter.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Since we're hitting on a bunch of that was a Freudian slip. Hot button topics.
Hot topics, yeah.
I'm thinking ahead is why
Ooh,
that's
hot
happening.
topic buttons.
What are your thoughts? And yeah, we can talk about hot topic. I'm going to, but what are your thoughts on gatekeeping? And you can kind of take that in any direction you want.
I don't believe in extreme gatekeeping, which is like basically saying like you only can like goth music to be goth, or like, you know, you have to be like this type of aesthetic or into this type of music to join a group on Facebook or anything like that. You know, that the goth scene should be a little bit more inclusive than that. The only gatekeeping I believe in is safety, making sure that we create a safe space so that way people are safe from people who are transphobic or Nazis or racists, and or even just people in general who are trying to harass goth people for who they are, making fun of them, or even, you know, like I said before, trying to pick up on goth girls because they wanted the stereotypical big titty goth girlfriend. You know, that's, I think safety is the type of gatekeeping that our scene needs. You know, that's the only gatekeeping I believe in. I do not believe in gatekeeping as an inclusivity to certain styles and music tastes.
Yeah.
All right, Candace?
I'm in the same boat. Like, I think gatekeeping to keep out racist, sexist, transphobic people is, and homophobic people is the way to go. But as far as music and fashion choices, I'm not going to gatekeep that.
Trey, do you have anything to add? Because I have a rant to go on.
I'm sure you have a large rant. I mean, you definitely teed it up to that. I mean, I pretty much agree with everything that's been said so far. I think the biggest thing about gatekeeping is gatekeeping dangerous behaviors.
Right.
It's not necessarily about maintaining some sort of purity in the scene. The only part of the scene purity, I guess, is gatekeep worthy in my estimation is not people liking the wrong things or doing the wrong things. It's when they take that same attitude of liking or doing things and then insist on what that thing that they're doing is actually right, despite, you know, the maybe prevailing opinions of everybody else. It's the, you know, my thing, I like the goth scene and I like this other thing, and this other thing is goth because I like it and I'm a goth. That sort of translation I struggle with. I'm not necessarily adamant against it, but it is one of those things, like I've said multiple times, it's a good reason to engage in a conversation as to, why does liking that thing, why do you feel it has to be goth because you like it? Is there a sense that everything you like has to be goth because a goth can't like not goth things? What's I guess the train of thought that leads you to want to make these declarations? That's sort of the conversation.
I agree with that. I definitely like things that are not goth.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, again, if you'll indulge me, this may be, I don't know how lengthy this is going to be, but I guess first I'll say I agree with everything that was said. I don't think all gatekeeping is bad. Like saying industrial music is not goth is, I guess, could be a form of gatekeeping, but that's more like respecting the history and culture of another group rather than trying to subsume it. I guess that's a whole different debate. I agree, like, gatekeep bigots. I think that's a healthy thing. Where I wanted to go with my thoughts, though, so I saw this TikTok video last week that I thought was interesting. And basically the person said, the argument they made was that gatekeeping originated in the 90s with Mallgoths, essentially, as they were saying, as consumerism caught up with goth and started selling our looks back to us in this mass marketed way, you had artists and the media portraying goth as this kind of edgy, rebellious, transgressive thing. And then you had a portion of people taking on the look and this ethos of being edgy. I've seen YouTubers, for example, make a similar argument that Mallgoths were all metalheads or some other alternative group, but not goth. And so gatekeeping was a way, the argument is gatekeeping is a way to keep the posers essentially out of the scene and protect the boundaries of goth and keep negative people out. And then the person ended this video by saying, Mallgoth these days is actually fine because it's nostalgic for its own sake rather than a way to become goth. So maybe I should just say I kind of disagree with some of this, but that's not to be negative towards the person, because I thought it was an interesting video. They have a lot of great content on their TikTok, actually, so I've learned a lot of things from them. So I'll put a link in there because I think there's a lot of good information. But
is that the Aeon or something video that you sent me?
I don't remember,
because I didn't see that.
Yes,
TikTok.
I did send
it was
to
a
you.
YouTube video. It was a longer form YouTube video.
It was TikTok.
By chance, was the TikTok you're referring to by Skltn Chr?
I think that sounds right. I would have to look because I don't remember names very well.
Well, if that's the person you're talking about, funny thing is, they're one of our friends.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Let me see. I've got it right here. Yes, it is.
Yes,
That's correct. That's fantastic.
Yeah, Kieran lives here and he's one of our friends. I think that's awesome.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not trying to criticize him. I like to take ideas that other people make and then use it as a way to discuss them.
Yeah, I like that.
So here's my take on this. So the implication that gatekeeping started with Mallgoths, at least that's what I inferred from the video. Maybe he's not making that case. I think you could argue it's like it was an inflection point, or maybe the model we know of as gatekeeping. But you did have net goths gatekeeping in forum posts and stuff like that. There was gatekeeping in the 80s and that kind of thing. But I think what's more interesting to me is the whole discourse that's happening around Mallgoths right now, because it's gained so much popularity. And I don't really like the connotation that Mallgoths were posers, because I was a Mallgoth and I had Mallgoth friends who are goths now, like people who went on to form death rock bands. DJ Gomez, who is a former host of this podcast, was a Mallgoth, and he wrote an entire article in 2015 about this, which I'll put in a link to. I will say there absolutely were a group of people who picked up clothing from Hot Topic and were listening to AFI and Mindless Self-Indulgence and Slipknot and Manson and watching Invader Zim and thinking that was goth. And there were people who picked up this sort of shock rock ethos, thinking that was how goths portrayed themselves. And they were just in the mall doing edgelord stuff. But there were also card-carrying goths at the time who were doing dumb shit like defacing cemeteries, or I've seen people like yelling insults at non-goths provoked. But it happens. Like the established goths of the time who were in the scene in the early 90s that weren't in high school, who were going to goth clubs, listening to, Screams for Tina and the Marionettes and Rosetta Stone and Nosferatu and like actual 90s goth music, the Harati, they didn't like Mallgoths. And the problem I have is it seems like we're forgetting what being a baby bat in the 90s and early 2000s was like. For me, I think the meaning of being a baby bat has dramatically shifted, because now you can just go online and you're a teenager, you've got a lot of free time, and you can kind of become an expert in a couple months. For kids like me, speaking to my own experience, who didn't have a local scene or were too young or didn't have access to goth forums, because you couldn't really just Google goth forums back then. You kind of already had to know the URL. And in a lot of ways, Hot Topic was kind of all we had. So we knew we were goth. We knew we wanted to be goth. And we were slowly discovering this drip feed of dark aesthetic, working our way towards what, if you want to call it proper goth or whatever. A lot of us did listen to metal and new metal, but myself and a lot of my Mallgoth friends also listened to proper goth music. Like I had some Sisters of Mercy music I loved. I was listening to a lot of The Awakening. My first goth compilation was a Dancing Ferret Records album, and I got that from Hot Topic. And I don't think most of my friends were saying, well, Korn is actually a goth band, and everyone who disagrees with me is wrong. It really was just a case where it was a popular band. It had dark imagery and a dark sound and themes. And we were looking for that. We were trying to find that. And that was just a step in the journey of getting into goth. And so for those who did think goth was Korn, or goth was Korn, Korn was goth, that was because they didn't have that immediate access to information. A lot of people I knew were also listening to like Skinny Puppy and Susie Sue, and also Korn or whatever, Manson, that kind of thing. So the gatekeeping is understandable from one perspective, but I know I ran into people who would dismiss me outright because of my lack of knowledge or the way I was dressed. And like I would ask a question about, where did you get those clothes, or what band is this? And they would purposefully obfuscate that information. Or some people would even just straight up tell me, I'm not going to tell you, you have to find it out yourself. And like Gopal Metro was on the show a few years ago talking about how he got mocked the first time he went out to a goth club because of how he was dressed, and he was just trying to fit in. And from the music side too, this, and for me, this was the height of synth pop and future pop in goth clubs. Like you'd go to a goth club and that's all you would hear. When I torrented goth music collections, because that's, or if I listened to goth radio, it would be V&V Nation and Assemblage 23 and Icon of Coil. So you can understand where the confusion came in. And I think all of this led to goths engaging in this sort of, what's the word, autoethnographic behavior, the trope of being grilled by other goths, like, what bands do you listen to? Can you name 3 albums? What books have you read? And then being rejected if you didn't know, or you didn't have like a goth parent. There's that scene from the movie, G-Word 83, I'll say, because it is a slur, which is a great example of this, where Clive, the main character, is this rural goth who's loved it his whole life, and he makes this journey to the city to go to a goth club for the first time, and he meets these other boys, and it's his first attempt to fit in. He's trying to connect with his tribe. He's finally found his scene, and he's so enamored by it. And in an attempt to fit in, somebody brings up a topic he doesn't know, and he says, "Oh, I love all of Poppy Z. Bright's albums." And instead of offering guidance, they laugh at him and they mock him. And I think that was the experience of a lot of baby bats in the 90s and early 2000s, at least from my experience. And so that's something I wanted to bring up. I also, the assertion of like Mallgoth is fine now because it's nostalgic, I think that's interesting. I don't think we've learned our lesson, though. Like, anytime a new dark or macabre trend happens and kids are saying, like, to use an old example, if they're saying like, "Oh, I love Motion Listen White, they're such a great goth band," or "I'm super into Witch House, it's my favorite goth genre," a lot of us start shouting about how it's not goth and you're not goth. Whereas I would rather do something like to use a positive example, what I see Awfully Sinister doing on TikTok, where he'll say, you know, if you like this dark sounding band, maybe check out this goth band, and then explain the relevance of that band to the scene and the history of it. I think you can kind of do both. We can talk about why maybe this band isn't goth, but in a lot of cases, I see adults just like straight up harassing teenagers, which is kind of fucked up. So it feels like this revisionist history on Mallgoths as either not ever having been Goth, which is obviously not true because, hello, I'm a fucking Goth, or forgetting the historical context that these kids were in and their path from baby bat to seasoned Goth. I guess I'll leave it there. I'll just, I would say try to become more of the fairy Goth parent to someone who just discovered something dark and spooky and maybe confuses that with Goth rather than immediately jumping down their throat, because that's not really how you change anybody's mind.
Right. Definitely. And I think I was very lucky, like getting into the Goth scene, having really kind and open-minded people who are like, oh, this is what Goth is, and teaching me. And I will admit, like, Motionless in White is still one of my favorite bands, and I am fully aware they're not Goth.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, I think, it's important to help guide, young kids who want to be a part of the scene, because the truth is they're our future. When we get old, there's always going to be people who are going to come in and try to keep the scene alive. For me, witnessing the Gothic takeover at Lakeside, it really tells me that Goths will never die. It will thrive as long as there are outsiders who are needing a community that can accept them. And of course, we should always guide, these young kids and not shame them, the way that you described. I've had my share in the Vampire Freaks days, being online, of being scorned because of the fact that I was a Mallgoth starting out too. And my perspective is, let's guide kids. Let's not shun them. Let's not make them feel like they're not meant to be a part of the scene. If maybe Motionless in White is a band, despite not being Goth, still maybe inspiring the next young generation of Goths to come into our scene, let them be. Yeah. Because you can't deny the fact that Motionless in White actually does draw influence from some industrial and Goth, even though they are a metalcore band.
Yeah.
I think the danger of like being that way towards younger people coming into the scene is driving them away. Like, you don't want these younger people being like, all right, these Goths are assholes, I don't want to be part of this crowd.
Yeah.
Again, I think I was lucky in my timing in this instance. When I was getting into Goth was sort of right at the cusp of what was leading to the whole Mallgoth thing, since I was getting into the Goth scene in 94 to 97. So as I was getting into the scene, it was also becoming, it was during that period of the mid-90s where it was becoming somewhat mainstreamed, with things like The Craft coming out in 96, Marilyn Manson getting big and becoming associated with Goth in 96, 97. And the rise of Hot Topic as a popular store. I know it I think it was founded in 89, but I don't think it really became popular until, again, the mid 90s.
Yeah.
So I was able to get in and sort of get that groundwork and understanding of the scene before it became this sort of popular invasion, which is, I think, where some of the gatekeeping really got stronger, is the sense of threat. This community that was underground for so long was being exposed to all of this attention from the outside in media, with the movies and the music that's portraying in a very public way their aesthetic, and maybe and in a lot of their minds misrepresenting that aesthetic. And then the rise of your Jerry Springers and your your out of control teen things where they're bringing Goth kids and their parents that want them to go normal, that becoming popularized. So all of that was
Montel Williams.
Yeah, that was a degree of threat to a community that had been underground, and a lot of this gatekeeping that you're talking about and these misunderstandings that would happen between the Mallgoths and quote unquote real Goths was this threat response. And that's not to excuse it, but that's was my experience, part of the rationale.
Yeah.
I was also, getting into it again in a smaller community too. So we didn't really have much of a friction. I mean, we did have a hot topic friction. I'll get into that in a minute, but it had less to do with Mallgoths, and more just to do with, competing shops and things like that. But ours was a small enough group that we pretty much all knew everybody. I mean, it was a small college town in central Illinois. So, everybody in the scene kind of knew each other. There weren't really people who were doing goth who were also, generally part of the scene. And most of the kids there were of age, or our venues were actually 18 plus. So we had a little bit of extra leeway for younger kids to come in and participate in the club culture rather than, being stuck hanging out in a public space with their core of other high school or other underage friends, because they didn't have the opportunity to sample anything beyond that. So there was a lot of that. So I didn't really see a lot of that tension until, Columbine blew up.
Oh.
And then I did see it a little bit more. Interestingly enough, I actually grew up in Littleton, but my family moved before that happened. I moved out of Littleton in 86. But my sister would have been in high school if we stayed at Columbine, probably at that time. So it was interesting for my life to be able to, unfortunately, now tell people, where did you grow up? And I say, I don't have to say Denver. I could say Littleton, and people know where that is, unfortunately. But I thought that was certainly an interesting, harkening back to my youth when this big event happened in this town I grew up in. But, growing up and existing in that time period right after that happened, I remember all of a sudden society viewing me as a threat. I'd just been in the goth scene for a couple of years. I'd started dressing up. I had a cloak I'd like to wear. And so I'd wander around. I was in college, so I'd wander around campus going to classes wearing the cloak. And I was stopped by cops.
Yeah, me too. Whenever I had my trench coat.
And fortunately, again, this was small town cops. They were usually very polite. And were, I'm sorry, you're wearing an unusual coat. Do you mind if I said no, they would not be as polite. I was being polite back, which helped the whole situation. But yeah, sure, you can pat me down. That's fine. I've got nothing to hide. And so it was always a relatively nice experience, for lack of a better term, for being stopped by a police officer, which, is never a nice experience. But
yeah,
for being stopped by a police officer, it was a nice experience. And I will certainly acknowledge my privilege in having the right skin color to encourage that sort of experience as well. But I did get a little bit of that sense of what it was like to be targeted, because all of a sudden events and forces out of my control turned me into a threat.
Yeah.
And what that did, from a gatekeeping standpoint, is make me a little bit more hyper aware and a little bit less tolerant of people who, while appearing in a way that looked like me, were doing things to egg on that situation. We're doing the edgelord things. We're doing the scare the normies things. And that was one of the things I had an issue with Hot Topic. Not that it encouraged that behavior necessarily explicitly, but you just look at the t-shirts they would sell with the slogans about scaring normies. And there was just some sloganeering around that I had little tolerance of, because of the threat I felt. If people who looked like me were evincing this idea as being dangerous people, that then makes everybody think that I'm a dangerous person. And that might be a good defense mechanism when you're in a group of people, because you will be scaring away other people because you're a larger group and you can scare. But when you're a solitary goth wandering the street on your own, you don't have that group of people protecting you. And you run into situations that, of course, occurred later, whether you could relate them correlating or not, but you have your Sophie Lancaster situations.
Yeah,
that can happen. And it's that sort of thing that I was worried about. And I didn't blame it on Mallgoths per se, because I didn't have a concept of that. I just had little tolerance for anybody, whether they were goth or not, if they were presenting a gothic aesthetic while simultaneously doing that edgelord threatening, hissing, carrying weapons, being just a dangerous person, even if that was a sense of defense mechanism or a sense of reaction to, hey, I was always the one picked on, now I get a chance to turn the tables. I developed no patience for that, because I don't think the concept of now I get to turn the tables is a good excuse, because it's just taking the things that you hated people doing to you and doing it back at other people is not the way to do things. It's not a healthy response. I get the visceral pleasure that can come from that. But ideally, I guess for me, is when I see people doing things that I don't want them to do to me, I would much rather exemplify good behavior when I am, being a representative of a subculture. And that is also why I, did have an affinity towards the Gothic charm school thing. And I know we've had discussions about that way back when, but that was one of the reasons I really liked that movement. It had its problems, but just the idea that you can be weird and part of the subculture that community or that the greater society views off and on again as dangerous, but by being really nice while still having this threatening look gives this cognitive dissonance that I always feel is an important way of getting people to kind of change mindsets. When your look and your attitude, or when your look and the stereotypes around that match the behaviors, people just fall back into the stereotyping. They just say, oh yeah, that's just reinforcing my stereotyping. I'm right. That's the way it is. But when there's a diametric opposition between a look that has a stereotype and the actual behavior that an interaction espouses, I think that cognitive dissonance is really powerful.
That reminds me, thing that really pisses me off is like people in general, especially mainstream media, they don't emphasize on mental health. Columbine was a result of that, and they chose to blame it on so-called trenchcoat mafia and music and video games rather than actually looking at the real problem. And I remember, actually, I went to two different high schools. I went to Arapahoe High School for my junior and senior year. And this high school is relatively close to Columbine. And the first time I wore a coat that went very close to my knees, that to them was a trench coat. And they pulled me into the office and said that I could not wear that it was way too intimidating. Like the fear was still there. It was like 10 years since it happened at the time.
Yeah.
But they still, were very intimidated by that and didn't want me to wear it. And for some reason at my previous high school before that, I just somehow managed to just get away with doing it. And I managed to avoid the main office from seeing me. And it was just interesting to experience such a different reaction when switching high schools at the time, especially because of the fact that my high school was so close to Columbine and that they were always taking acknowledgement of the anniversary of it there.
Yeah, I had a similar experience in high school where actually I had a trench coat mostly modeled off of the dude from Hangman's Curse, to go back to that. But in 2001, I was banned from wearing it to school because the dean who talked to me was like, oh, we watched a video about how you can hide bazookas and machine guns and shit in that kind of a jacket, so you're not allowed to wear that. And of course I had my trip pants on and all that shit. And But you're right too, Trey, that like groups of Goths were writing letters to news publications about why Goths were pacifists and not associated with violence or Columbine, and academics were doing that too. And Voltaire was going on the news, answering questions about that. And for me, I did have that sense of suddenly finding agency and power dynamic through being the object of maybe not fear, but I guess fear, and playing into that as a form of transgression towards what I viewed were harmful social norms and expectations. And that was in large part due to my youth and my naivete and absorbing what was presented to me. But I will say, like, again, to disabuse some generalizations, there were certainly Mallgoth friends of mine who did not take that perspective, and a couple of them who actively argued with me about having that kind of an ethos, I guess. So,
yeah, I definitely experienced it within the people who were actually in the Goth subculture. It wasn't one of those things I associate exclusively with outsiders who, as you were saying, the Mallgoths who really just liked Slipknot and Marilyn Manson and whatnot. I definitely knew people who liked Bauhaus and Susie and all that, that also were doing this, threatening edgelordy stuff. And I didn't have any patience for it, regardless of their Goth credentials.
Well, maybe you should ghostwrite for Gillian Venter's new book. All right. Well, let's kind of start wrapping up here. I have the two questions I'd like to end on. A couple of questions before we let people know where they can find you online and find your info about your events. Are sister questions. And those are, what are you most concerned about for Goth right now? And what are you most excited about or hopeful about for Goth right now or into the future, I guess?
My concern about Goth right now is if anybody's really going to take, safety very seriously with the way the world is actively changing as of right now. But what I am most excited about is the fact that we have a generation, being Gen Z, who are actively reinforcing positivity and influencing the new generation here. And I don't mean, of course, Instagram perfect or TikTok perfect people who are portraying just image that, as we talked about, that's being enforced to think like, oh, this is how perfect you have to be or else you're not Goth. No, I think what I'm excited about is that people are getting, a little bit more accepting of, Goth in general, and that we have new generations here who are really helping that. Interestingly enough, one of the things that I was thinking about recently was how much more accepting the world seems to be of alternative looks these days. Like we can get so much more job opportunities and things despite having an alternative look. I was actually watching this video from the BBC in 1983, just really kind of showing how difficult it was for goths and punks during that time in London, particularly, just the unfortunate circumstances they had to go through with trying to find work and have to rock what they called either alternative or anti-fashion, as it was being called. And not only that, but like if my research is correct, London back then, jobs and the economy just really, really sucked. So
Thatcher's London was a nightmare for anybody who didn't toe that sort of yuppie norm,
neoliberal
line.
Yeah. So Yeah, I think what I'm most excited about is our generation reinforcing a great positivity and welcoming sort of way for the scene. And also the fact that our world in general seems to be getting a little bit more accepting of alternative looks, not just goth, but any kind of unique look in general. Um, and running with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything you wanted to add, Candace? Or no?
I agree with all of that. On my end, my biggest concern is kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, is just making younger generations feel more welcomed in the community.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about a lot of the things we have going on in our Denver scene, like Gothic Takeover, and we have some other plans in the works too to make things more accessible.
I love hearing about Denver. It sounds like a wonderful place to be goth, and it looks like, from everything I've seen, a wonderful place to be goth, and that's really exciting to me.
It is a wonderful place to be, and I hope we can see you out here someday for one of our events.
Yes, I would love to. Absolutely would love to.
I will happily help you get out there. I love Colorado is my favorite state. I lived there for 10 years of my life, and the only reason I'm not still there is because I didn't really have a lot of contacts there when my marriage dissolved. So I came back to where I had family and friends. But I love Colorado. I think it's a beautiful state. I love living out there. I've lived both in, like I said, Denver area, Littleton when I was little, and then between 2008 and 2012, I was in Colorado Springs. Man, it's always been one of my favorite places. I usually get out there with my mom primarily every couple of years because she still likes to try to get out and go skiing, and I'm her primary ski buddy. So yeah, I try to get out there as much as I can.
Yeah, my brother lives in Denver, so I'll have to figure out a trip to visit.
Yes, definitely.
Make a dual trip.
Yeah, you guys will have to get together with us one day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's do that. So I will have links to all of this in the notes for everyone listening, but can you sort of point people to where they can find more information about your events and any relevant social media you want to shout out?
For the Arcane Vampire Ball, they can learn all about it on our official website, which is simply www.arcanevampireball.com. There, they can learn everything about the event, from what we are, our code of conduct, and also our ticket pricing and many other things. And of course, we are finalizing our lineup of talent as we speak, so they'll be able to learn about that very soon.
And then for Gothic Takeover, we do just have a Facebook page where it's a not-for-profit event, so we don't have the funds on that one to make a website. But you would just look up Gothic Takeover at Lakeside on Facebook, and you'll find all the information of the upcoming event on May 20th.
Fantastic.
Coming right up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I forgot to also mention the next Arcane Vampire Ball is happening on Sunday, April 30th. And the very first theme we're doing for this year of our second event is Walpurgisnacht.
Ooh, I love it.
Yeah, because April 30th, the evening is when it starts.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you both so much for coming on. This was such a treat for me. This really felt like a throwback to the kinds of discussions I would have about all kinds of different things with goths when I was younger. And so this was a lot of fun for me. So I really appreciate you both coming on and chatting.
Hey.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much, Danny. Let me just say it's an honor to be on the biggest goth podcast in the world. And also, we had such a blast doing this. So thank you both so much for having us be a part of it.
Yeah,
well, now
thank you. You both were
I'm
great.
blushing. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Well, while we are here and I'm thinking about gatekeeping, I have a thing or two to add. Again, gatekeeping itself, I think, is not a bad thing. We talked about gatekeeping bigots, for example. I also think saying you need to listen to goth music to be goth is gatekeeping. And that's a sentiment that I agree with. The homology hypothesis that I developed 5 years ago, you might be familiar with if you've been around for a while. It was an attempt to define and understand goth culture. That's also a form of gatekeeping. But I think the issue I take is the way in which we discuss these subjects. For example, part of the drive behind gatekeeping in the 2000s and the 90s was the rise of Hot Topic, as we talked about, and with it, a commodification of goth. And it was commodification, and it is commodification. We live in a capitalist society which serves the market. The market will always appropriate the semiotics of resistance, and Goths saw this as a threat. I talk on the show a lot about supporting small artists, using your capital to buy from creators in the goth scene, especially in your local scene, if possible, because that money will return back into the community and it encourages this network of creators in our scene. But when we're thinking about gatekeeping, and I have a temptation here to start talking about about ontological multiplicity as a way of understanding actor networks and their relation to neoliberal markets. But instead, I'll say this as an intuition pump. Are you punching up or punching down? Also, as a sidebar, our next episode will be the place for the ontology discussion. So I'll skip the metaphysics for now, but I'll talk a little more about that at the end of this episode. I think we should be gatekeeping ideologies more than people. The kid shopping at Hot Topic in the 2000s was doing so because that's what they had access to, because they didn't know any better, because they were from a lower class family. Right? I'm not going to repeat all the context I shared around my own experience in a highly controlled, conservative environment in a world with very few ways of accessing information. But that, I shared my experience with that. What I'm getting at is accosting these kids isn't going to change their spending habits. It might get them out of the scene, but what will that accomplish? They won't have examined their relationship with neoliberal systems. They won't have the tools to make more ethical decisions. They'll leave and perpetuate the same systems somewhere else. In my mind, if we want to affect change, we need to educate, we need to create, and we need to foster community. Leftists are fantastic at infighting, but this works in opposition to the goal. If commodification is your concern, you don't change people's minds by shaming them, by presenting the goth ethos as a box they have to fit into, or by bullying them. So for me, it's not gatekeeping itself that's the problem. It's the ways in which we approach discussions around cultural boundaries, discussions around the ways of being in the world, and discussions about capital, both social and monetary. There is a serious issue with marketplace consumer identities being sold to us from the wealthy class. But that attempt to turn goth into something mediated and moderated by capitalism, to turn it into something that has no teeth, no transgressive power because it's associated with this mass-marketed fashion and nothing else, is part of a system that is set up to do this to everything. We are inculcated into the belief that this is a good system, and it takes work and time to understand just how pervasive it is. What I think we should focus on is examining our relationship to capitalism and focus discussions on how alternative ways of being in the world create new realities. That production of our own goods is resistance. That being visible as Goths in the world is resistance. That community rather than hyper-individualism focused on self-fulfillment and authenticity and atomization is resistance. When I was talking about the new media theory earlier, yes, I blame these systems for that anxiety that people feel coming into the scene, but I think we can take control or some control over this by both exposing those mechanisms and fostering healthy discussions around Goth. Right? We all know the baby bat with imposter syndrome that comes into the scene and after a few months starts telling everyone what is and isn't Goth and why they are the only ones who are right. But if we have some empathy for where that mindset comes from, if we think about what I kind of walked through earlier about social media training us to be an audience of critics, if we can show kindness rather than criticism, if we can shift the locus of Goth to local communities, for example, kind of in the way that Gothic Takeover at Lakeside does, then over time, those anxieties and insecurities, I think, can be remedied. Whereas the instinct to engage in identity protection to save the entirety of Goth and its 40 years of history by complaining about new ideas or naivete or ignorance will likely do more harm than good. So that's probably all I want to say on that for right now. Maybe we'll see what happens next episode. I think we're going to cover some of this from a different perspective. A bit of a sidebar before we move on. I had posted very vaguely on Facebook that I was planning on going on a rant about gatekeeping and Mallgoths. And a friend of mine reached out who I actually, since we were kind of talking about that period of time, if my memory serves, and my memory often does not serve, but I met them on a web forum. And it was either some kind of vampire forum or a forum based around a movie, because, again, at this time period, this is how we communicated. It wasn't anything Goth specific like the NetGoth forums, but certainly there were a lot of Goths like me on there, baby bats, Mallgoths, people interested in the macabre. And this was the era, again, of communication over message boards and AIM Messenger. And we were all just a bunch of dumb teenagers in high school trying to figure out life, right? And it was incredibly difficult to find information. So this was somebody I knew from back then, and we lost touch over a long period of time and eventually found each other again and realized we were both Goth and interested in witchy things. And that was really wonderful. But she wrote up a little piece about her experience as a Mallgoth and asked if I would read it on the show. And I've read it. I think it's wonderful. I think it's relevant and insightful. So that's what I'm going to do before we move on. For the baby bats out there, yes, Mallgoths existed, and no, we weren't all Mansonites. Certainly our subculture experienced its height in the 90s club scene, but so many teenagers at that time had little to no access to it. Some Goths online have said that Mallgoth wasn't a thing, and it's simply not true, at least not for my friends and me. I lived in a toxic home environment. High school was not much better in terms of bullying. Thankfully, during freshman year, I found a group of friends who made me feel safe and were accepted, and we all came from somewhat similar backgrounds. Lower middle class, blue collar, many dealing with difficult situations within the home. The mall was one of the only places we could go without needing a car or having very much money to spend. Although dating was prohibited, my parents trusted me to go to the mall alone if I returned before dark. Because of my parents' strict rules, I certainly did not have anything resembling a goth wardrobe. At 15, my stepmom was still purchasing my clothes. To her credit, most of my items were current styles, but modesty was always the biggest determining factor. Due to the trends at the time, I was fortunate to have a pair of black lace-up boots that were versatile enough to go with almost any outfit. The pre-mall transformation ritual occurred at Jeremiah's. I would ride my bike to the trailer park and the gang would be at his place. One of the girls, Christina, would bring extra clothes and helped me get ready. Her boyfriend, Jay, didn't wear makeup, so he usually managed the music selection as the rest of the guys did theirs. Then, the 6 of us would excitedly head to the bus stop, a blur of ghostly faces and black trench coats flapping in the wind. As cheesy as it sounds, those first few trips to Hot Topic felt like magic. The store was dark, moody, and had that infamous Hot Topic smell. The staff members had enviable style and hair. Back then, Hot Topic had some gorgeous dresses, not to mention an entire wall of boots and shoes. Hot Topic's clothing seemed to be of a higher quality back then, and they carried a wide range of styles. Over time, I curated a collection of treasured objects and sacred adornments that I kept hidden in my closet. Fishnets and assorted cosmetics from Hot Topic, a paperback copy of Lost Souls from Walden Books, assorted occult jewelry from Spencer's Gifts. From the hippie shop, Auric Blends perfume oils that smelled like incense resin and spices. At some point, I had saved enough money to purchase a velvet ball sleeve dress from Hot Topic and added it to my secret stash. Sometimes I would try the dress on just for a few moments in the privacy of my room. For the first time in my life, I was making decisions about who I wanted to be, untainted and protected from the harsh judgments of the outside world. Getting into goth was the first thing that truly felt like me. Perhaps that was part of the mystery and enchantment of it all. My journey into goth was primarily an internal one. Without being allowed to dress the way I wanted, I instead had to focus on the music and the literature that often inspired it. Once I was able to leave home and curate my own life, I had the freedom to dress how I pleased and finally experienced the club scene. Unfortunately, this is also where my friends and I encountered the judgment regarding our appearances. From my experience, the real goth elitism has always been about appearance more than music. Older goths seemed to regard us as posers and rolled their eyes when we finally showed up at the club with our off-the-rack outfits. But who do you think were the assistant managers and general managers of these stores? They were. In the 90s, Hot Topic was one of the few places where alternative people could be employed without being forced to change their appearance. The only difference was that the 20-something goths had more experience in the scene and had a better sense of style when it came to mixing fabrics and combining pieces. Everyone shopped at Hot Topic at some point or another. The older goths were simply better at styling it than others. They also had vehicles that gave them access to thrift stores which were not accessible within walking distance or via bus. There seem to be 2 myths about the Mallgoth. Number 1, we weren't goths at all, and number 2, we only wore Hot Topic clothing. As many others have pointed out, those old photos are more likely depicting kids that listened to nu metal and Marilyn Manson. While it is true that the majority of Mallgoth nostalgia has nothing to do with goth itself, that doesn't mean the teenagers in those photos didn't eventually discover the subculture and fall in love with the music. Sure, the occasional cheerleader went on a Hot Topic shopping spree with daddy's credit card after seeing her first typo negative video. The rest of us had a much smaller budget. The average teenager made $4.25 an hour and could only work 15 to 20 hours a week during the school year. It wasn't that we had giant wardrobes from Hot Topic. It was simply that once we got our first pair of demonias or bondage pants, we wore that shit everywhere because it was all we had. Our paychecks were small, so the idea that Mallgoths had entire wardrobes of Hot Topic merchandise was not true for the average teen, and certainly not representative of my friend group. Was goth commodified? Absolutely, and I'm not defending Hot Topic as a company. Going to the mall with my friends wasn't just about consumerism, though. We explored music and books and this emerging version of ourselves that felt exciting and authentic. Browsing the shops together, sharing pizza in the food court, flipping through CDs and discovering new bands, these bonding experiences can't be duplicated shopping at Killstar or Shein. Do I wish my experience as a baby bat would have been different? Yes. Things would have been easier if my parents would have allowed some space for me to express myself. That being said, I cherish those Mallgoth memories with my friends. So there we go. And I guess on a somewhat related note, if you have something you'd like to send in to the podcast, either an audio clip of yourself or something written that you think might be a valuable addition to an episode, please send me an email, contact me, let me know what your idea is, and we'll see if we can work something out. I like community contribution a lot, so it would be fun to see more of those. The email is cemeteryconfessions@gmail.com. And if I don't get back to you right away, I apologize. My life is fairly chaotic at the moment. But with that said, it is time to get into Sinister Suggestions.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
It is that time. Time for me to again recognize there is too much goddamn music out there for me to be able to recommend everything that's come out just in the last month. And I feel awful that I don't have the time or ability to do that. But I'm glad to be able to share what I do have. And if you are looking for more, it is out there to be found. I will say, since the last episode, I've created a playlist on Spotify where I put one song from each of the recommended bands. They're from their newest release that is on Spotify. Some of these singles are not on Spotify yet, but the band is there. In some cases, the band does not have any music on Spotify, so it will be missing. So, of course, I recommend checking the show notes, following the links to Bandcamp and listening there. But if you would like to listen through Spotify, I've created a playlist called Sinister Suggestions, a Cemetery Confessions podcast compilation. So each episode that comes out, I will collect the Sinister Suggestions and slot them into the playlist at the top of the playlist. So the most recent recommendations will be at the top. You don't have to scroll down. But with that, let's get into it. So our first band is Princess Ugly, and they are out of Portland. Their new single is called An Individual Soul. It's a creeping, unnerving goth rock track that gives shades of Christian death a la Ashes, with a grinding vocal that almost gives me Alien Sex Fiend or Daniel Ash vibes. It almost sounds like it could be a track out of a Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines game, because it has that vibe of the era. and it has this preternatural, uncanny feeling to the track. And that is a compliment, by the way, an absolute compliment if anyone was in doubt. I don't know if there's anyone who dislikes that game, but I love the soundtrack for it. There's also a gorgeous ethereal backing vocal on many of their tracks that crawls under your skin and sticks there. It's a fantastic single, great band overall with plenty of tracks that utilize tone and space and tempo to create a sense of unease or dread in the best possible way. California-based Fevr is back with their new track Running Away. Comparisons to She Passed Away and Twin Tribes are inevitable here, I think. It's just that brand of quick tempo, pop sensible darkwave and post-punk, especially in their newest track. But overall, it's, to my mind, a more dance floor focused darkwave band with great beats, jangly guitar, and either flat, deep vocals or understated melodic vocals. This track is pretty much guaranteed to get you moving, as will their back catalog, and sometimes that's exactly the kind of thing you need. From the Scottish band Propter Hoc, begins fairly unassuming with a drum machine and some synth, and then builds into this delightful and playful yet morose, almost dark disco track. It's bright, it's dancey as hell, there's a Sisters of Mercy style backing choir, electronic bleeps and bloops over a sick bass line that reminds me of the Swedish band DuPont in a lot of ways, for anyone who remembers them. There's a lush, deep vocal over this sexy, almost minimalist dance beat. It's a great track, and their back catalog is great as well. The Medicines is a band from Almere in the Netherlands. And their new EP is Alone in a Room, and the title track definitely sounds inspired by 17 Seconds era The Cure, especially in the bass and drum machine specifically. It's really got that 80s London poppy post-punk sound. Then we get to In Uniform, which has more of a in the flat field a la Bauhaus sound in the guitar tone and the tempo of the track. The vocals switch up as well, from a lighter, more soaring vocal on the previous track to a darker, more somber, Murphy-esque tone. And then they close off the EP with something different from either of the previous tracks, which evokes a feeling of hollow emptiness and loneliness that's just exquisite. It's a great EP. I can't wait to see what they do next. Pontaguhla, I'm sure I've said that wrong, but they come to us with a full-length album out of Brazil. And the quickest reference I can give, since that seems to be what I'm doing a lot of on this Sinister Suggestions, is it's definitely taking inspiration from bands like Drab Majesty, but with more of a focus on foregrounding the percussion. But you certainly get that dreamy, ethereal, swirling guitar, that reverbed snare and tambourine. There's a smoky vocal that vacillates from a brighter, higher octave tone to a more serious, low tone. And the lyrics are in Portuguese, which I love to see as well, because it always adds a different tempo and rhythm to the music than what you might expect out of an English-speaking band. And there are multiple bands on this list that don't sing in English. Some tracks on the album deviate from this formula, though, and have more of an 80s Italo disco sound, or even kind of an indie rock sound, which definitely keeps it fresh. Out of San Diego comes Cerulean Veins with their new album Black. This is a band I'd classify more in the vein of the likes of An Actors or Kill Shelter, or even Golden Apes I can hear in there as well, in some of the guitar lines. And it's that they're less focused on what we've kind of come to expect from a post-punk classified band, and draw more from an alt-rock or indie rock foundation that incorporates gothy elements from there. There's soaring emotional choruses, dirty sounding guitar lines, some of that 80s pop rock kind of like heartland rock, which slows down the instrumentation and injects more space into the music. It's definitely a breath of fresh air, a great perspective on the genre, and evokes a lot of emotional depth and thought. Next up is the Texas band Skltn Chr and their single Eternally. The Bandcamp page describes them as goth lo-fi, and I think that's an apt description. I can picture this track showing up on a YouTube compilations of songs to cry to. It's just so goddamn sad. It takes the more swirly post-punk sound and gives it a lo-fi twist with deep resonant vocals and a haunting melody. Seriously, it's absolutely the soundtrack to be fucking depressed to. It's just deliciously melancholic. As soon as I saw the cover for the EP Pissing in the Dark by Bite Marks out of LA, I knew I was going to love it because it's an edited image from one of my favorite 70s sci-fi movies, Zardoz. This is a 2-track EP, and it almost does what death rock does with the carnivalesque sound, but instead it's to darkwave. It's kind of like darkwave with older sounding synths and infuses a sort of low budget B-movie sci-fi feel. It's kind of like a goofy movie convention, nerdy electronic vibe without being so fun as to make it ungoth. Actually, Spock comes to mind, not in the sound aspect necessarily, but in the way they make industrial music for nerds. This has a similar vibe to it for me. Another LA band is Casket Cassette. There must be something in the water over there, but this is their new single, Antabuse. It's a darkwave song with synth pop sensibilities in that the chorus especially has this melodic, dancey sound that sinks its hooks into you and pulls at your heartstrings. The vocals are a goddamn delight, absolutely perfect for that mawkish, synthy goth sound. Short and to the point with pop sensibilities is what it is. Definitely recommended. Now, this is a fun one from Portland. The band is Solara Obscura, and they have a single out that is described as dark instrumental space goth. And that's exactly what it is. I kind of imagine this is what I'd be listening to if I was actually Commander Shepard flying through space in Mass Effect. It kind of brings to mind Steve Roach, actually, except you don't have to be stoned off your tits to actually enjoy it. Alright, maybe that was too mean, but it's an instrumental track with shades of, like, Vumpscut, weirdly, and Trance to the Sun. It's a soundscape, basically, and it's a damn good one, so if you're looking for more of that Project Records era sound, definitely check this out. Well, you know I always like to try and sneak in an off-kilter album in here somewhere, and that is this split EP from Dot Wall and Nymph of New Mexico. The first half of the album is a blend of old school EBM, which I'm a fan of. You've got that punchy hardcore dance beat blended with a dark noise that has that grinding electro kind of beat to it. The second half is from the band Nymph, and it's more of a goth rock post-punk foundation, but also incorporates this unsettling avant-garde electronic element which distorts the music, and there's also like odd audio clips here and there. So there's some vocals similar to the Funeral Medieval, actually, which kind of lends itself to the funerary and inhuman vibe of the entire album. I love this kind of shit, so absolutely worth checking out. From Australia cometh Desmond Doom and their new single, is so perfectly described on their page as Joy Division meets The Smiths that I don't think I can add much here. The production quality of the new single even matches something I'd expect out of the 80s with all the static and pops of a vinyl record. It's a different take on that Joy Division sound than what I've heard from similarly styled bands, as it sounds more true to the era, which definitely pulls at nostalgia, but also just gives you more of that kind of sound if you're looking for it. Joy Division is never going to make another album, but something like this gets close to that. You know, some people might argue it plays it too safe or it's too derivative, which is fine. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But if you want more of that sound, then this is what you're looking for. Witch Lover. This is a band out of Tulsa, and their EP was released back in October, but I've just discovered them recently. The 4 tracks on this EP feature bass-forward post-punk with swirling synth and modulated death rock vocals, crafting the atmospheric equivalent of a fog-drenched cemetery. I, for one, love the emphasis on the booming, distorted bass guitar. Some tracks pull at that nostalgia by emulating the spirit of Only Theater of Pain by Christian Death, without sounding like a regurgitation or copycat of what's come before. It's a take on modern death rock I haven't really heard in recent memory, and absolutely want to hear more of. From Guatemala comes Cuando Todos Duermen, and I'm sorry for the pronunciation, but they have a brand new full-length album. This band features an Eastern European style of post-punk with low, placid vocal delivery. It's in the vein of Rendezvous, they come to mind, also Ploho and Bioconstructor. The drum machine is the star for me, with a great range of percussion styles across the album and plenty of play with what sounds to me like woodblock and tambourines. The production is incredibly well done, and the album doesn't become stale while listening through, and that's nice because I tend to expect it to feel stale with this type of post-punk. They play with tempo and sound, with some tracks sounding like they were recorded off of a cassette tape, giving that lovely warm static effect. Some tracks like Mar even have a romantic feeling to them, with longing synth lines layered in. The guitar has that hollowed out iteration on the jangly Chr guitar we all know and love. And it's often layered with a rhythm guitar and melody guitar, which adds a nice depth to it. Overall, the album gives that empty, lonesome, nihilistic, sad bastard vibe that I always get from this genre. Sweet, sweet melancholy. From Phoenix comes Corbeau? I'm not sure. And this is a darkwave dance floor banger. I don't think this single could be any more perfect than it already is. I think that might actually defy the laws of physics if it was. It's got haunting, moaning guitar playing over a rhythmic drum machine reminiscent of the 80s. There's a synth that modulates between stompy dance beats and 80s cheese, topped off with a gorgeous fucking vocal drenched in echo, which gives this spectral feeling coming from beyond the grave. It's going to be playing on repeat in my head for sure, probably as I make my way to the cemetery. And then finally, we have flute-centric darkwave. Does that sound interesting to you? Well, the new EP from Minimal Unit out of Russia is for you. In reality, the flute only features in the first track, but it certainly sets the tone for this unique EP, and I think it fits nicely in the goth adjacent category. For example, track 2 has a lot of trappings of modern darkwave and post-punk bands, but with an 80s synthwave kind of melody that is more of the silly kind of 80s variety than what we've come to expect with dark 80s music. This EP gets really fun and creative with the keyboard. If you need a pick-me-up after some of the more depressing albums that have been recommended here, then this is just the remedy you need. That is it for Sinister Suggestions this episode, and that means it is time for Azzy's segment, All Goth Considered.
Greetings, you beautiful bats. I'm Azzy, and you're listening to the March 2023 edition of All Goth Considered with Obscure Undead. In this segment, we explore 3 recent releases and hear what the artists have to say about their music. Refill your wine glass and let's dive into these dark waters together. The Medicines are a Dutch post-punk and goth rock trio featuring Amber Hermsen on vocals and synths, Jean Thysse on guitar and drum machine, and Vinny Ferreira on bass. I can't recall the last time I heard a band lean heavily into the sounds of 80s goth rock and post-punk and come out on the other side with music that really captures the soul and timelessness of the era. Honestly, I shouldn't be surprised considering Jean runs in-depth music and owns what I believe might be one of the most comprehensive vinyl collections of 80s goth. Jean was kind enough to tell us about the title track off their latest 3-track EP, Alone in a Room.
Hello, my name is Jean Thysse from the band The Medicines. We are a post-punk gothic rock band from Almere, the Netherlands. We have recently released our new single, Alone in a Room, on February 4th. This new single contains 3 songs, Alone in a Room, In Uniform, and All Too Stupid. I think all the songs have their own sound and feel to it. We decided to record in my recording studio and mixing the songs by ourselves. If I need to tell what our inspirations are, is that most of the songs we wrote is based on our personal lives and views. The music of The Medicines is inspired by post-punk and new wave bands like Echo and the Bunnymen, The Cure, Joy Division, The Sound, Girls' Names, and so many more. The first and title track, Alone in a Room, is one of our danceable songs. The song has a bass line that might remind you of a forest. That is what some people told me when they first heard Alone in a Room. I can understand why. The second and middle track, In Uniform, is an anti-war song that me and Amber Hermsen wrote together. We had the same idea and thoughts about war, so we decided to write a song about it and make our message clear. I think In Uniform is one of our complex songs. Third and last song, All Too Stupid, is a song that I wrote all by myself. It is about the differences between young and old. The song itself is more experimental. All the 3 songs are different from each other and still fits well together. That's why we chose these songs for the release, because we want to show you who the Medicines are.
Darkness surrounds me, a void closes in. The world warps away from under my feet. I do not recall what happens next. Nothing of substance, memories black. Here I am now, alone in a room. The clock ticks an hour, alone in a room. strength back? When will it end? I've lost my own mind in this wretched place, removing the turmoil out of my head. This room takes its toll, memories black. Here I am now, alone in a room. Forgive the reply, alone in a room. Now, alone in a room, the clock takes an hour, alone in a room.
I have to admit, I have some bias featuring Caustic Bats. They're a local band from me out of Orlando featuring Di on vocals and guitar, Ripley on vocals, guitar, and electric cello, Lance on bass, and Andre on drums. I had the pleasure of catching them perform at a backyard punk party here in Tampa on their third, I believe, attempt to play a show here in town. It's the curse of Tampa for them. Their first two shows were canceled due to hurricanes, including one I had booked for them, and they killed it at this backyard party despite people twice accidentally unplugging their power on their way to the bathroom. Curse of Tampa indeed. I was instantly in love with the raw expression of their sound. Di tells us about their inspiration behind their leading single, Violence.
Hi, it's Di here from Caustic Bats. So, the inspiration for our first single, Violence, came to me on a late night at my desk. Once I started writing, I couldn't stop crying. It's about a period in my life that's nearly all blacked out now. I feel that I've lost about 4 years to it. But essentially, it's about overcoming oppression and encouraging others to escape hostile situations. And you can do this by listening to the people you care about, or even just the people around you, and speaking up and standing up for what's right. I feel that we live in such a politically and socially violent time right now, with lawmakers trying to control our bodies, who we love, what we learn, and where we can exist. Now more than ever, our stories need to be heard. Stories of resistance and stories of survival.
I am anti-life. The beast of judgment. The dark at the end of everything.
Yama Uba is another band I had the fortune to catch live at Dark Spring, Boston 2022. Out of Oakland, California, this duo features Akiko from Ötzi and Winter, formerly of Mystic Priestess, and together they create a beautiful raw blend of post-punk and darkwave. When I saw them in Boston, it was my first time meeting them, and their music and company felt in a lot of ways like coming home to old friends. They were wonderfully kind enough to gift me a copy of their 7-inch double single picture disc vinyl, and my only complaint is that it is far too short. I want to live in their music. And the song that I'm featuring today is Laura off their double single. Akiko sent me a short version and a long version for the inspo behind the track, and I do apologize for going over my usual time limit, but I feel like you need to listen to the long version.
When we wrote Laura, that was the first song that Yama Uba had written together as me and Winter in the same room together. Most of the songs before that had been written and structured on synth by me, and she had just come in and added a whole bunch to it. So this time we had the opportunity to really think about the structure as a guitar song. It was in the middle of the pandemic and pre-vaccine, and we just were going crazy with not being able to play in our bands that had more members in it. And we were just really craving large sound. And so we wanted a rock song. I knew conceptually also that I wanted for this song to be a hard rock song based on lyrics I had already written. So hard rock to us, it means usually a template of Sisters of Mercy with the driving sense and the distortion and the sustain of the guitar. And we also found out that we both share a love of hair metal, so especially the band Cinderella. So I think you can hear some of those influences. And we were listening to other big rock bands like the Cult, and I think the simplicity of the drums compared to the guitar is what we really got out of that to accentuate the guitar sound. Yeah, we just really played with how rock can we get on this song. And the lyrics had been written based on a series of DMs that I had with a friend who was a doctor in Italy and had been watching people die throughout the whole pandemic. And her entire hospital had turned into a COVID hospital. Every ward was now a COVID ward. It was kind of about her grief and her sacrifices that she made. One of the lines in there, I move like a Kraftwerk robot in the old videos, that was from her getting COVID herself finally. She did put a tube down somebody's throat, and she had to do it without gloves. And she made that choice. She got COVID one day before she was scheduled for the vaccine. So now she has all these neurological problems. She has trouble walking, all of this kind of debilitating stuff that destroyed her body because she was working for the rest of society. And when shows were coming up, she was telling me how, of course, she wanted to go to a show. Of course, she wanted to say hi to people and listen to music and dance. But seeing so many deaths every day of people who've made these decisions, she just couldn't do it. To me, it really struck me as not just this experience that my friend was going through, but also a very kind of classically human problem. So the song was both an exploration of that kind of existential problem. This is not the only time this is going to come up. This is going to come up over and over in history. And we have to decide, how do we support the people who support other people? It really made me feel for examining what the purpose of music is. What is the purpose of shows and getting together and parties? It was a song that had anger in it. It was a song that had a real reverence for our friend Laura and for the role that she had played. And it had a lot of sadness for kind of humanity in general. The things that keep us together, the things that make us human, are also the things that are our downfall. So sometimes that kind of frustration and just the confusion of a situation like that, I feel like sometimes you can only express it through loud music and maybe through rock music. And that's how we did it here.
thank you for listening. For more music, please follow us on most major social media platforms under the handle Obscura Undead and check out the bands featured this month. Take care of yourselves. Love you. Bye-bye.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. There's millions of things that you could be doing, and I'm honored that you were here. A lot of effort and time goes into creating this podcast from myself and others, and we all appreciate your support and the fact that you want to be involved, you enjoy listening to this podcast. Of course, a heartfelt thank you to everyone who supports us on Patreon, everyone who has stuck around, everyone who has been a long-term supporter. You are the reason this content is put out into the world, and you mean everything to me. So thank you so much. If you are not on Patreon and you would like to get some extra content, you would like to support the show and enable us to continue creating these episodes, please head over to patreon.com/cemeteryconfessions. It is not an exaggeration when I say every single dollar counts. Every member, every whatever level that you're at has an impact. And like I always say, allows this show to continue into the future. So thank you so much. On the next episode, we're going to be chatting with Paulo. If you've been around for a while, you will know I've talked, some would say too much, about ontology, about multiple ways of being in the world, and approached philosophy and metaphysics from a specific perspective, sort of an activist perspective. And all of that was inspired by lots of conversations with Paulo over the years. He had reached out to me after watching a YouTube video, maybe, I don't even know anymore, 5-6 years ago, and started up a conversation. Well, he recently defended his PhD and is going to be coming on to talk about metaphysics and ontology and epistemology and how that, in a practical sense, translates to a lived experience. And how does that relate to gatekeeping? How does that relate to defining and creating boundaries for a culture? So I'm really looking forward to getting Paulo's perspective and bringing him onto the podcast after all of these years. So thank you again for listening, and until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of the Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.